Hello there, that's Sid Smith. It is, and I'm Sean Hewitt, and we're here in the submersible USS Dauntless in different sections of the ship. Yeah, as you can see, Sid's populating his face with his diving goggles, and we're here to talk about a fantastic album, I think, and not to preempt anything, an episode 32. It's Bob Dylan and Time Out of Mind. Now, I've got a long relationship with this record. I think it's one of Sid's favourites too. He's been listening to it for literally years. And well, the basic story about this one is Bob suddenly contacted Daniel Lenoir after years of not being in contact with him. And he was summoned to a hotel room in New York, old Lenoir, where Bob played him not one note of music, no tunes at all, but just presented him and read to him pages and pages of lyrics. And he was very impressed, Daniel Lenoir. He thought this was this could be a way of saying that rock and roll wasn't for the young. It was for elderly people too, aging people confronting their own mortality. That's the thing he got from the records. And the lyrics that Bob had told him. I'm being distracted by Sid Smith's larking about, ladies and gentlemen. And they agreed to start recording, initially based at a place Lenoir ran called Teatro in California, former Mexican porno cinema that him and engineer Mark Howard had transformed into a studio. Dylan loved this studio, and they began recording there, and they got some interesting results. When he'd first met Dylan had given him the lyrics, and he'd also given him a listening list full of records like Charlie Patton and Little Walter, and a list of artists, basically rhythm and blues artists from the 20s and 30s. And he was a bit taken aback by that, Lenoir, and was fearful of doing a blues record, as he put it. But Dylan's parting shot was, "What do you think of this kid Beck? Maybe it'd be interesting to make a record like he makes records." And the Beck record at that time was an album called Odelay, which is a very, very good record. John Cale at the time was a big enthusiast for Beck and Odelay. I saw Beck shortly after that album, a year or two after that album came out in Nottingham, and I've seen Beck a couple of times. I've always been taken aback by his keyboard player Roger Manning, who literally wears a cape on stage. A man who's not afraid to meld the genres. Anyway, emboldened by this Beck remark, Lenoir went to meet his New York-based friend, a drummer called Tony Mangurian, who you call Sweet Tony, who was very into this kind of modern hip-hop programming, sampling-based drumming. And they came up with the idea of playing these records that Bob had given them, Tony playing drum beats to them, and then erasing the record and seeing what Bob thought when they got to Teatro. And what happened when they got to Teatro, Bob brought his bass player, Tony Garnier, who never played on one of his records before, but was the band leader on the Never Ending Tour, and he plays on this record, and he plays on every record since. He is the band leader for Bob. And he previously played people like Paul Simon and people, and he's a very good bass player. And he turned up with him. Lenoir was there, and Sweet Tony, and they started recording. But what soon got in the way of it was it took such a long time to set up these rhythm tracks that they'd recorded that Bob quickly got bored with it. And after 2 or 3 goes of waiting 15 minutes for them to get the rhythm track going before they could play, he just said, "Why don't we just play? Can't we just play?" And so they did start playing like that. And they were getting what Lenoir regarded as the basis of an album together at Teatro when Bob suddenly announced he didn't want to record there. He said that it was too close to where he lived in California, and he got a lot of things going on with his family that were distracting him, and he wanted to get those sorted out, and then they could go somewhere away. So he wasn't his mind wasn't divided. And thinking they were going to go down the road, Lenoir agreed. They went 3,000 miles away to Miami to Criteria Studios, because they all wanted to record in the old Studio One or Studio A there, where so many great records have been made by so many artists in the 60s and 70s, all right up until Rumours and things like that. It was supposed to be this legendary, great sounding room. When they got to the studio, that room still existed, but it had been converted into a tape store. And the one that had become the new tape Studio One was, in the words of Lenoir and Howard, and indeed Dylan, a totally dead sounding room. And it took a lot of effort for them to get that sounding right with various echoes and effects. And because most of this music was played live in the room, and they wanted the room to sound good. But it took a hell of a lot of work to get an acceptable sound from the studio 3,000 miles away from where they'd originally started. Mark Howard had to drive the gear across the country and he didn't have time to stop in any hotels, he said. He just slept in lay-bys with the truck. So anyway, they set it all up and they constructed a band. Originally, Tony Mangurian was there on drums, and David Kemper, also from Dylan's touring band, were there. They were soon both sacked. Lenoir was behind the sacking of David Kemper, who said who he thought made the band sound like a bar band. Tony Mangurian, the very hip producer and drummer who Lenoir liked, they came to a row over Lenoir smashing a guitar in the studio. In front of everyone, reducing a female studio employee to tears. And Dylan was standing there while that was happening, and he picked up one of Lenoir's expensive guitars and just held it in the air until he calmed down, and then put it down again. And then at the end of that argument, Dylan apparently said, "And you can send that hip hop drummer home as well." And their response to that was to employ Jim Keltner, who was a big Dylan mate and ever reliable, and Brian Blade, the jazzy drummer. And for most of the album, they're playing as a double drumming team. Tony Garnier remained on bass, and you've got this enormous cast of people. There's about 10 or 11 musicians on the studio floor, all playing live. And this was, again, very odd. I mean, you've got like Bob Britt is there. Robert Britt is announced as. He's only joined Bob's band very recently. He's on this album. He's just joined Bob's band in about 2019. He's on the current tour. We got Bucky Baxter. He was in Bob's band after this. Acoustic guitar, pedal steel. Duke Robillard on guitar. Winston Watson plays drums on one song. Cindy Cashdoller, she's on 3 tracks. Augie Myers on organ. Jim Dickinson on keyboards. A lot of very well-known people, but they're not playing as star guests. Lenoir came up with this idea. He could hear from the description of Dylan's description of what he wanted it to sound like a modern record from the 20s sort of thing, that he wanted to orchestrate these songs with a lot of musicians. This caused a lot of problems in the studio. A lot of the musicians didn't really understand what was going on. They were hearing the sound in the studio they were playing, but they weren't hearing it all the same. A lot of them were being fed loops from Teatro into their headphones, which Dylan couldn't hear, because a lot of the time he was just singing over the top or playing and singing over the top. So the other band members could often hear these grooves and are responding to them, but they're inaudible to the leader of the band. In the control room, they're hearing all this stuff, but Mark Howard is, Lenoir's instruction is feeding in layers of effects and layers of distortion and texture on top of it, and they're experimenting with how it sounds. So you've got 3 wholly different sounding versions of every song, even to the people in the room live. And a lot of Jim Dickinson has been very vocal. He doesn't think he doesn't think Lenoir knew what he was doing, but it's pretty obvious he did. He knew exactly what he was doing, and there were often tense moments between Dylan and Lenoir, which they sorted out by going into the car park. And because of that, people like Dickinson are saying, yeah, there were odds throughout their thing. Jim Keltner is very interesting on this. He says, they're not at odds. That's how Bob works. He doesn't want anyone to think he's having a good time. And he suspects there's a bit of a performative aspect by Lenoir and Dylan. They're going out to the car park and having a friendly chat, and everyone in the room thinks they're seething at each other. So there's all these different kind of versions of these, what seem to be often quite difficult sessions. And towards the end of it, I think Lamar walked out, and Mark Howard, in his own account, which is, I think Mark Howard's account is the most detailed, and I don't thoroughly trust him because I think he's got some other problem with Lenoir that could be colouring his version of events. But it all went on, ahead, and we eventually got the album, which was released to massive acclaim, and eventually winning the Grammy for the best album of the year, among 3 it was nominated for. This is a controversial album in Bob's circles because it was an enormous success commercially, it was an enormous success critically. But a lot of Bobcats who are stuck in the Stone Age and actually think Bob is an authentic person, an authentic performer, which is to me the funniest misconception of all. They don't like the production. They think it buries Bob songs under syrup, as they put it, and fog and gloop. And they particularly hate, like, the first track, Lovesick, when he starts singing I'm walking down streets that are dead, and his voice is fed through an effect. They don't like that kind of thing. That was Bob's idea. So everything that they don't like has been signed off on by Bob, and a lot of it originates from him. When you see some of these people, as I saw last week on the Steve Hoffman forum, saying that there's a new mix just come out of this record, yeah, now what we need is for them to de-Lanoir Emmylou Harris's Wrecking Ball. I think, I think we know we're talking about people with cloth ears, and they think a record producer is there to get a bloke with a guitar and just record an absolutely accurate. That's not what a record producer is there to do, and that's not what Lenoir is trying to do with this record. I've heard the new remix. I'll come to that in a second. It's very interesting, and 1 or 2 tracks probably a bit better. Overall, though, I've been listening to this record for 25 years, and I prefer the original. I don't like. I'm not against any remixes. I'm not against, like, for example, the Beatles remixes. I think the recent stereo remix of Revolver is in every conceivable way superior to the original stereo mix. I'm not a Luddite, so if someone's going to give me a mix that it goes beyond Lenoir's version, that's quite tempting. But I'm not convinced that it is a better mix, and it's not presented as a replacement in the box. It's presented as an alternative for people who moan about it. This is my original copy of Time Out of Mind. If you see that, it's a promotional copy. It arrived at my old workplace, well, the office of the paper I still work, as a review copy before the release date. So I've been listening to this album for more than 25 years before it came out. And even last year, I was discovering new things in this record, and I still do quite often when I listen to it. I think this is his best album since the early 70s. And I think he's really got an idea here. The idea of this album, I mean, the only album he'd released, apart from the 2 cover version albums we did in the last episode, was this Unplugged album, which is a performance he did, and it's all old songs, apart from Dignity, a song that was left over from Oh Mercy, and was released subsequently as a single. This album is a song cycle. Every person in this, in every song, is the same person. Paul Williams, the late great down-to-earth Dylan critic, said it's a cycle. It's a meta text. The same person is singing all these songs, and it's not quite Bob. It's someone who's obviously been through a terrible love affair that's gone wrong. It's possibly someone who is a soldier or a slave at the time of the Civil War. There are loads of references to that, or a prisoner. Every song seems to be this person walking through this weird landscape. The first 3 songs start with the words "I'm walking," and that's quite deliberate. You get a sense that in the song, which is a very good song indeed, "Trying to Get to Heaven," you hear the sense of this kind of slavery idea. There's a writer called Professor Grayley Herod who's written a book about this album, and I agree with some of it. I don't agree with his murder ballads theory. I don't think these are murder ballads. I think this is a person imagining he's a person in a kind of dream landscape. There's a hell of a lot of references to dreams in these songs. The person is in the first song, "You destroyed me while I was sleeping." This is a person walking through a dream landscape, and he's trying to put his life in order, thinking he's got too old to carry on, and he's facing death. So you get songs like "Trying to Get to Heaven," where and he's also a person who he either is or imagines he is some character in the Civil War period. There's a bit in "Trying to Get to Heaven" where he sings, I was riding in a buggy with Miss Mary Jane. Miss Mary Jane, she's got a house in Baltimore." That is an actual quote from a song they used to sing in schools and in among slaves and prisoners in that period. It's an old Negro spiritual, and it's obviously meant to reflect on that period and that this guy is of that time. You get "Not Dark Yet," which is the most direct. It's a beautiful song, "Not Dark Yet," and it's a direct confrontation with his own mortality, described by Emmylou Harris as the best song ever written about aging, in other words. You get songs like "Cold Irons Bound," in which I saw a bit. There's a book in the new bootleg series where they say, "Yeah, this guy's gone the way to freedom." No, he's not. He's in cold irons bound. He's 20 miles out of town, and the song, the references to love are almost always doom laden as well. I went to church in Cold Irons Bound. I went to church on Sunday and I saw you pass by. My love for you is taking such a long time to die, and you get this kind of, it doesn't come to any conclusion really. This guy's in a state of mind, and he's trying to deal with the breakdown of the love affair, his loneliness, his bereft feeling, and also the person he's singing to seems to be at sometimes possibly God as well. In the last track, which is 16 minutes long, and I can't wait to hear what Sid thinks of that one, that's a track called "Highlands," in which Bob adapts a very simple verse by Robert Burns and writes a superior version of it every time he changes it throughout the song. And he's describing coming out of this dream state. And this is the nearest you get to actual Bob Dylan on the album. And he's insanity is crashing down. Everything's doom laden. He's trying to play Neil Young. He's trying to play Neil Young because he feels old. And as an old man, he's being told to turn the stereo down by younger people in the neighbouring flats. And then in the middle of the song, we get this lengthy 7-verse section where there's no chorus, where he's in Boston town and he goes in a restaurant. And this entire sequence is taking place in the writer's imagination. He's not in a restaurant. He's not speaking to a real waitress. The real waitress is, if anyone, Sarah Dillon, by the way, in this song. And he's being told why he's a failed artist by this very confident and clever waitress. And she actually she says, "I know you're an artist." And how does she know that? He's just met her, hasn't he? And "Draw a picture of me." And his reply to that is, "Sorry, I don't do sketches from memory." So this is someone from his past, reinvented as a character. And he goes through a long series of, "I can't do it. I've not got my drawing book. I don't know where my pencil is at." One of several references in this song to possible impotence. It's in the manner of the old blues songs. And when he finally does it, he doesn't draw a few lines or draw a picture. He makes a few lines like a songwriter would. And he shows them to you. And his big fear is always, he describes a society, he describes people in a way he sees is true, and they don't recognize it in his writing. And she replies, "That don't look a thing like me." He goes, "Well, young miss, it most certainly does." She goes, "You must be joking." I said, "I wish I was." And eventually, obviously initially sexually attracted to her, he ends up sloping out of the restaurant, having not achieved anything. And he says he slides down out of my chair, but no one's going anywhere. Again, a reference. This is not happening. Then he ends up in these streets, full of young people, full of noise, full of life. young people with young men and young women in brightly coloured clothes. He changed places with them in a minute, and if he could, he says. And this is where the only slight bit of progress comes, because the first line is on the first song is, "I'm walking down streets that are dead," and of course, at the end of this last song, he's not. The streets aren't dead. He's dead. He's basically emotionally dead, and he's slowly coming to realise that. But then if you play the album again, you come right back to the beginning of the cycle again. Overall, I think the sound of the album is a big success. I think it sums up the mood, this kind of not quite here, not quite there dream world of the songs extraordinarily well. And I think anyone who criticises the way it sounds because you can't hear all the instrumentation is basically talking out of their arse, and to use the technical term. This album has been a big influence on other people. The biggest influence I can find to illustrate that is this is obviously the key influence on David Bowie's album Heathen, which is again got a similar kind of grey tinted sound to me, and is also fundamentally concerned about a man confronting his own mortality and trying to plea to a God who he might not even be there. It happens in several songs on Heathen, and it is well known that Bowie loved this album, and he did in fact cover Trying to Get to Heaven. There's been a lot of talk about this album over the years. Some tracks appeared on the bootleg series, Volume 8, Telltale Signs. But in the last few days, we've had this, which is a 5 CD set. It's the bootleg series, Volume 17. And this, again, quite overpriced, but worth the money, I'd say, just about. The first disc is the remix of the album, Michael Brau's 2022 remix. Then it's followed by 2 discs of outtakes and alternates from the many different versions of these songs recorded live in the studio by this crowd of thousands, including 3 or 4 tracks from the original Teatro sessions with a very much more stripped back sound, including a most beautiful, I've heard him do The Water Is Wide, the old folk song, many times, never as beautifully and as atmospherically as he does it on here. Disc 4 is live versions of all the songs he's done live from the album, which is everything but Dirt Road Blues. And the 5th disc is called the bonus disc. On a very expensive 3-disc edition of this, there were some extra outtakes from this album, and all the ones on disc 1 and 2, and all the ones 4 or 6 extra tracks that were on the 3rd disc you've not been able to buy unless you've got a fortune. They're all collected on the final disc. So all the released outtakes from these sessions are on this box, and it comes with the usual essays and books. I think this is the start of his late career. This is the start. He finally realizes he could make an album of his own songs again, and he comes back in blazing fashion. On the production, he's kind of ummed and ahed over the years. A song called Mississippi was done on these sessions. They had many attempts to do Mississippi. Many of them are in this box. That's a great song, and he eventually just withdrew it because he didn't like Lenoir's approach to it. Lenoir was also very concerned with trying to get him a hit single, and he spent a lot of time on Can't Wait trying to get this hit single, and it didn't work, and because Dylan was resisting him. He wanted to go back to the original Teatro version, and Dylan kept saying, we've moved on from that, haven't we? That was ages ago. We're not doing it like that anymore. And so there was all that. But there are several versions of Can't Wait in the box, one of which is what in this book, which I read previously, Mark Howard describes as the Pink Floyd version. And it's unmistakable on disc 5, which is the Pink Floyd version. It sounds just like a early 70s Pink Floyd playing it. It's quite remarkable how Pink Floydy it sounds. Bob rejected that one as well. And it's got Dreaming of You, which we'd already heard on Telltale Signs. There's a couple of versions of that on here. Dreaming of You I think has been knocked off the album for the simple reason Series of Dreams was knocked off of Oh Mercy. It tips the hat too much about it being a series of dreams. The fact he's dreaming of these people and he's dreaming of the situation. He doesn't want to be so on the nose and literal about it. But anyway, I think it's a remarkable album, possibly a masterpiece. There's only one song I don't like, and we'll come to that in a bit. What did you think of it, Sid?
So as I always say,
Yeah, here we go.
I had not heard this before, and I had no expectations of it. I'm sorry, I had no knowledge of the background of it. So that's been really interesting, listening to you go through the kind of the different competing ideas behind it. I think listening to all these Bob Dylan albums as a part of this series, it's always interesting that I think Dylan works best when I'm talking about his original material. I always think Dylan works best when he's got a producer who kind of puts another spin on things, and Lanois certainly does that. I can understand possibly why some of the Bobcats, kind of aren't keen on it. Personally, because for me, I find Bob albums are just a bit dull. It's not that the songs are bad. It's just that they're, although some of them are, it's just that it's all a bit still. It's all a bit kind of one track sounds much like the other, regardless of the band or whether or not it's a solo thing. Why I took to this one is largely to do with the sound of it. For me, it's the sound of it is so. I know a lot of people would want to have the pure, unadulterated Bob, stripped back and with a microphone singing his brilliant songs about brilliant things. For me, though, there's not enough in it for me for that kind of thing, being a non-believer. So what I need is a bit of the ritual and the ceremony, if you like, as a distraction from the center of it. And I think Lanois does that incredibly well. Every album Daniel Lanois involved in sounds like a Daniel Lanois album. So for Bob to kind of get in touch with Lanois and say, let's do this, that's obviously where Bob's mind was. And of course, he had worked with him, as you pointed out. He had worked with him before. So there's obviously some kind of connection there.
Well, he definitely likes him.
Yeah. And I think there's enough going on. Some of the, I'm not very good, as you know, with the titles of these things. And I did make a note of some of them, but I can't find it. I have little scraps of paper on my desk, and I make sort of little bits of notes and but then I lose them. But there's several of them. Several of them I was very engaged with. Some of the tracks, like I think it was. Hang on a second, I've got the track list here. Dirt Road Blues. Actually,
did you like that one?
Yeah, I did. I did, and it's just like it's a sort of knockoff song, really, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. But
I say it's got a CD of all the tracks he's played live. That's the one he's never played live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, some of the other sort of bluesy ones, I can't remember the names of them. So the album sort of unfolded for me. I wasn't aware of the song cycle thing, but since you've told me that kind of makes sense in a way.
Yeah.
So the album sort of slowly unfolded, and I definitely kind of wanted to know. Oh, hang on, I'm getting the 10-minute warning here. So I definitely wanted to know more, go further into it. One song kind of led me to another, and that doesn't always happen when I listen to Bob Dylan songs.
They're great. That's great.
Yeah. But the when I was listening to it, and there was this song that was going on as they do, and I thought, hang on, is this still the same track? And then I realised, fuck, this is 16 minutes. I was like, no, but actually, it's all right. You know, you have to be.
It's got a Shaggy Dog story element.
Yeah. It has to be. You know, you've got to be in the right mood for it, I guess. And as you know, I don't really pay any attention at all to what he's singing about. So I've no idea what it's about. I didn't know about the whole Civil War thing, and I didn't know about the whole. What was it? A William McGonagall poem it was based on?
Robert Burns.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So anyway, but I was engaged by it. So yeah, I kind of I do have a favorite track.
What is it?
Well, and it's funny. I wish I could persuade you that I didn't just make this up. But I've got me little bit of note. There it is.
Yeah.
The track that I'm going to pick to take to me Bob Dylan Desert Island, God forbid, would actually be Cold Iron Bounds.
Really?
Yeah. And I was captivated by that track. So much so.
I think you'll like the new mix of that, because that's one of the songs that really benefits from the new mix.
Well, I hope never to hear it, but I was captivated by it, and one of the things I was captivated by was the whole sound of it, which I have written here. 4 minutes into the song, there's a descending chord sequence, and I've written 2 words, and those 2 words are Pink Floyd.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, obviously there was a Pink Floyd feeling in the studio at some stage.
Where the Pink Floyd feeling comes from is it's the organ. That's what the critics are referencing. It's that kind of late 60s farfeezery kind of thin frequency sound that the farfeezer does so well. I mean, I've no idea what organ they used on but it's not that thick, luxuriant Hammond sound. You know, it's got a very different signature to it. So overall, in the few minutes left to us, overall,
that's a thumbs up.
This is a Bob Dylan album that I could see myself if I saw this going. If I was in a record shop and I saw this album.
It says he's playing Vox organ combo and Hammond B3 organ and a chord. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think the organ that on Cold Iron Bounds is definitely the Vox. But anyway, if I saw this in a record shop, I would buy it actually. Which nobody's more surprised than I am to hear me say that. But
my mind is eroding. But I don't know what you think.
But the final part of all of this is, yes, I would buy it again. But that's because I like the sound of it. And the content, the actual content is all right. I don't mind it, but it's not why I would buy the album. I would buy the album because every now and again I like to immerse myself in a particular sound world. And this album, Time Out of Mind, comes with a sound world. It
definitely has got that coherent sound world.
Yeah, and it sound, the performances are good. It's, you know, all the signature Lenoir things are in there. And if you don't like that stuff, then you're going to hate it. But I don't mind. I don't mind it. So definite thumbs up for me for this one.
Well, I've got 2 favourite tracks off this. I like the album as a whole, and I think if you did buy the album at any stage and you play it again and again, you'll get more out of it as you go on through the years. But I think Not Dark Yet is the best single song on it. I think Not Dark Yet is a brilliant song.
Yeah, I've got a note on that as well.
Lovely words, lovely arrangement and production on it, a lovely subtle drumming interaction between the 2 drummers, and lovely words. I mean, she wrote me a letter, she wrote it so kind. She said down exactly what was on her mind. I just don't know why I should even care. It's a very memorable verse. And then Highlands, for all the reasons I mentioned, but also for the great thing where the waitress says to him, "You don't read women authors, do you?" She said to him, at least that's what I think I heard her say. And he says, what do you mean? And what does that matter anyway? And he says, well, you don't seem like you do. And he goes, well, ma'am, you're well wrong. He says, who'd you read then? And I said, Erica Jong. And that's not on the original version of the earlier tape. But he started singing that, and apparently everyone was sort of falling about. He had to punch it in later on. But that just sums up the kind of bloke he is. I'm a dinosaur from the 70s, and I don't know all these modern women authors you're talking about. It's a brilliant snapshot, and it's also dead funny. It's just dead funny, and it's a revealing moment. And I thought it always made me burst out laughing, and it apparently always made him burst out laughing when he sang it as well.
If all Bob Dylan albums were like this, I'd be probably on the Bob bus. What's the next album we have to deal with? We have to grapple with.
Well, the next album in episode 33. We'll do an episode 33 in the third, mate.
Hey!
33 is Love and Theft in inverted commas. See you next time.